Hello, everybody. We really appreciate you joining us. My name is Lee Johnson. We really appreciate you joining us tonight for this memorial session for Charles Mills. I'm actually gonna be on the back end of this session, sort of managing the chat and managing the speakers list. So I just want to offer everybody just a sort of quick set of instructions before I hand it over to Chris Seeley, who's actually gonna sort of moderate and host this session. If you've already reached out to Chris or I and asked to say a few words, we've got you on the speakers list. You'll be called in order. But we imagine that a lot of you might, if you didn't already, might feel moved to say something as this goes on. So I just want to let everyone know that if you would like to say a few words, if you could, don't use the raise hand option. If you could just send a message to me in the chat. So again, my name is Lee Johnson. I'm one of the two hosts. Just send a message to me in the chat and say, I would like to say a few words. I will put you on the list and, I will communicate that to Chris and she will call people in order. So again, I really appreciate everyone being here and I'm going to hand it over to Chris at this point.
Cool. Thank you, Lee, so much. And thanks to everyone for coming. I just put a message in the chat sending virtual hugs to everyone. It's just so good to see everyone, even if it's just two-dimensional versions of ourselves. So Lee and I, thought that, and this is really just our way of figuring out how we can offer any sort of assistance or support to us as a community, right? We felt deeply that what was missing upon news of Charles's passing was the need to be together in community. And so given the space that we're in right now, as far as the status of the world, this was the sort of next best way to do that. And so really, really, really appreciate seeing everyone and that you've taken the time to be with us in community. Just as a reminder, this session is being recorded and a couple reasons why it's being recorded. Several people can't be with us today, largely in part because of time zone difference, right? Charles's influence and love and magic touch, as it were, really transcended national boundaries. And so there's really people all over the world that's really grieving this huge loss right now. For those of us who are joining at times when you should be asleep, we do apologize for that. But one of the reasons that we chose this time was because we're actually in the middle of SPEP. SPEP is a space that Charles would have graced us with his presence, given us hugs, that smile, that laugh. And so we felt it appropriate to create a space to gather together while SPEP was happening, which is now. So we do apologize that if this happens to be a not great time for you. But as I was saying, one of the reasons that it's being recorded is so that we can make this memorial available to those of us who would have liked to join in community but are unable to. A second reason why it's being recorded is because Charles, as you know, has family overseas, and we would very much like to make this recording available to them, to his family in Jamaica, so they could have just like a sense of how deeply Charles touched us and blessed us and allowed us to grow as human beings. And so in that spirit, for those of you who haven't reached out to us to indicate that you would like to speak, just know that if you do offer any comments in honor of his memory, and if you're so moved to share how he touched your life, those comments will be available to his family. And I'm pretty sure that it would bless them. So if for that reason alone, please do consider sharing whatever memories you have of Charles, and so that they can have a sense of exactly how much of a giant he was over here in the United States. So So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. As Lee mentioned, the sort of protocol for today is that if you would like to say a few words, please do send a private message, a chat message via the Zoom function to Lee, and she will ping me. And I will bring in people in groups of threes. I think that's the best way to like facilitate a flow that makes sense. What we're asking you not to do is to use the hand raise function in Zoom if that's available. We're like 300 deep on this on this screen, which is amazing and really a testimony to Charles. But there's no way that I can keep track of 300 or so Zoom hands. So let's not use the Zoom hand for today, and do message Lee if you feel moved to speak, and we'll get you in as best as we can. Let's go ahead. First on my list is Linda Alkoff. So Linda, can I invite you to say some words about Charles?
Thank you, Chris and Lee, for organizing this so beautifully and so quickly. And thank you all for being here so that we can be together. I first want to assure everybody that Charles had very good care. He was diagnosed with very advanced cancer in the spring, and it was just a very fast and aggressive form. But he had what we called a Charles support team in place. I was there for part of the summer. I was just there for the last 10 days. And there were local Chicago people, because he was in Chicago during the pandemic. Ann Eaton, who really stepped up hugely, and Sean Ebels Duggan, and Rachel Zuckert, who did amazing things. And then we pulled in at the last minute, Jose Medina. And I want to apologize to so many of you, because I know many of you are very close to Charles, but he wanted this kept secret. So we followed his instructions. He was very, very strong on that. And I understand it, because, who wants to talk to everybody who calls you up, and he gets a million calls a day about his illness. So he wanted it kept secret. And we followed that until he had to start canceling things in the middle of August. And then word got around, and we started to try to let people know. But we've been involved in his care, and his family and his friends back in Jamaica have also been involved at every step of the way. And many of them sent voicemail messages that I played for him. I put the phone up to his ear in the last few days, and in the last few weeks really, and he could hear their voicemail messages. This was when he was really.
Linda, you muted.
Linda, you're on mute,
Okay.
Linda. Okay, there you go.
Okay, he could recognize voices from his nephew, Michael Mills, his first cousin, Ward Mills, his many friends, including Brian Meeks, who's a Caribbean poet. They told him stories. They sent us music to play for him in his room. I have a list of this music that I want to share with all of you somehow. They sent us pictures, and we're going to organize. Oh, and another person of the care support team was Larry, I want to say, my husband, who held his hand, who helped organize his apartment, who did a million tasks throughout. So we had a team. Charles had a desire to live, and he fought to live to the end. And it really wasn't until last Tuesday night that the doctor said to us that there was no more treatment and no more hope. And we moved to hospice. He was in a very good facility, had very good doctors. So I want to assure you of that. I just want to say a couple more short things about Charles, because I want to, in a way, correct the record about a couple of things, and about things that maybe people don't know very much about because he kept them pretty secret. One is that Charles Mills was a man of the left whose writings were intended to speak to the left because he had a background as a radical activist in the organized left in Jamaica from the 70s and the 80s. His party was the Jamaican Workers' Party. They have an image here you can see. I have a copy of all the newsletters from his apartment. Instead of a hammer and sickle, you'll notice it has a machete and a wrench. So he was the Canadian representative of this organization when he moved to Toronto to get his PhD at the University of Toronto. He was also an activist in the organization in Jamaica before he went to Toronto. This was a tricky business. This was risky business. Charles took risks. His father, like mine, was a professor at the university. And when you're a professor in these small countries, you are involved in national politics. His father was in the Michael Manley government, which meant that he was not terribly happy about Charles's radical activism and the particular trend that he was associated with. I'm sure some of you had that experience in your lives. But what's important here, I think, is that this party was dedicated to support the working class of Jamaica. That's what it was aimed to do. It was a socialist party. It was a Marxist-Leninist party. And this activism that Charles had informed his philosophy. He never left the party. When the party fell apart in the late 80s, that's when he was no longer part of it. He didn't renounce anything. I think he learned from his experience, and he certainly revised some of his views over the years. And I sometimes I suspect now that his turn toward retrieving some elements of liberalism was motivated by his experience in a Marxist-Leninist party. This is another thing that Charles and I had in common. I was also in an organization. I'll just leave it at that. And we talked a lot about that and how it informed our philosophy. We came to philosophy from this experience, and this experience informed us and motivated us. And, so I just want to clarify, Charles was not an armchair Marxist. He got his hands dirty. He was subjected to FBI surveillance in the United States, and he experienced some troubling things. And he was worried about FBI surveillance up until last week. So I'm not sure how widely this is known, but now that the danger is over for him, I hope that this becomes a part of how we understand his work and his life. He made a decision, I think a conscious decision, when the party fell apart, to divert his energies to theorizing oppression and building a beachhead of radical philosophers in the academy, which is on display right now before us. And that's why he spent so much time mentoring and supporting and writing letters of recommendation endlessly. This was motivated by his desire to change not only philosophy, but the world. The second thing I want to correct is the issue of the holes in Charles's sweaters and the holes in his jacket. I posted that picture of his beloved jacket that we all know and we all saw. And, his overall, shall I say, frugal way of life. So here's the truth of the matter. From the first day, Charles got a middle-class job in the United States as an assistant professor of philosophy. He started sending money home to his family in Jamaica, and he continued this his entire life. He supported a family of 6 in Jamaica, his brother, his beloved brother, and his beloved brother's family, his 2 nephews, and his 2 nieces. All of Charles's money went to them. And he saved a lot of money also. And my job now as executor of his will is to find every penny of his money and funnel it back to his family. He set up a trust so that his family will be taken care of. So, you know, this is also something that he and I shared, because I was also engaged in this kind of thing. And we would talk every week about this and strategize and commiserate and, you know, share advice to each other about how to do this well. So, you know, I think we all have seen the holes in his clothes. This wasn't just a peculiarity of him. This was because he was saving every dime, except for buying books. He bought a lot of books and CDs, but he really saved every dime to send home to his family. And, you know, he joked often about the irony of this flow of money that he was sending from these elite universities that he worked for to Jamaica, to the third world, as we used to call it, via him, on the basis of the work and the academic success that he had achieved based on his critique of racial capitalism. So that is what funded this flow of funds. So I just have a story also, finally, of his last words. He lost his power of speech at the end, and his eyesight, but he could still hear. And so I hadn't heard him say anything for a couple of days. And on Friday, a nice Polish nurse from hospice, it's Chicago, right? A nice Polish nurse came into the room. She had to fill out endless documentation. She had to take some demographics. She asked me his religion. I said, he's an atheist. And then she asked me his race. And she looked at him and she said, he's white, right? Because, you know, he was so pale and so ashen at this stage. And it took me a couple seconds where I was trying to register what this question was and why she had said what she said. And while I was like assessing it, this voice came up from behind me, and it was Charles. And he said, "Black." That, honest to God, was his last word. And for those of you who know colorism in Jamaica, that's his politics. It is not a term of self-identification for people of his family, but he asserted it in that moment. So I have the pleasure to announce that there will be another book by Charles Mills that will come out. We have found it in his computer, and Chike Jeffers has been named the literary executor. So Charles's unpublished work and this book will come out. And if any of you have any unpublished work by Charles, or papers or other things like that, you should send it to Chike Jeffers, because he is his literary executor. And I'm also hoping that we can find some institution that will house the papers of Charles Mills. And we've already collected some things, but for people in the future to put together the story of his work and of his development. He won't, however, be able to speak about this book, to give talks on it, to defend it, to promote it. We must do that. We must take up the mantle. We must continue to spread the word of his work, and we must continue to push the domain of political philosophy to put it front and center. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Linda. I think I can speak for all of us to say that we really, really, really appreciate that. Just like a sneak peek of his last days, and how committed he was, how committed he stayed politically right up to the very end. We really appreciate that. We love you for taking the time and finding the strength to share that with us. So thank you. All right, so I have my list up on my screen. So the next three speakers would be Damian Scott, Abby Wilkerson, and Charles Simon Aaron. So I'll now invite Damian to unmute himself. Hopefully he's here. Damian, are
Sorry,
you
Chris,
here?
I don't think Damien is here
Don't
now.
think Damian is here. Okay, so we'll circle back.
Okay.
I do believe that Abby's here. I think I might have seen her. Abby, are you here? Can we invite you to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Lee and Chris, for getting us together tonight. It really means so much to me, and I know to all of us. So please forgive me for reading this. I think it's the only way I'm going to be able to get through it. What would you try to say if your house caught fire? People sometimes ask. Your answer is supposed to tell something of your story. Today, this came to mind as I took my copy of the racial contract off the shelf and looked at the inscription. For Abby, a sister in struggle. I'm sure there are many copies similarly inscribed to other siblings in struggle, perhaps on some of your shelves. Aware as I was that many copies were being inscribed to many other siblings in struggle, I still felt the solemnity and joy of Charles's recognition, possibly even with the tinge of his signature wryness. If you're listening, Charles, sorry, not sorry. The struggle that we, his readers, share, of course, is the struggle writ large. We share the struggle writ large, the struggle for another world in which everyone has the means to agency and dignity, everyone can have their needs met, the defeat of white supremacist, patriarchal racial capitalism. When Charles Mills arrived at the University of Illinois at Chicago in 1990, where I was a grad student in philosophy and women's studies, one of the many changes that his arrival heralded was the department and the profession's slowly increasing recognition of feminist perspectives as integral to understanding the world and our possibilities within it. One of his contributions to the struggle writ large was his commitment to feminist philosophy and his humility and grace as a male philosopher taking up feminism. A few years ago, after the passing of Sandra Bartke, a group of us gathered in Carrie Brecky's backyard outside Chicago on a beautiful summer afternoon for Sandy Fest, as we called it. Around a dozen women, Sandy's students and colleagues, including Samantha Brennan, who I think is here tonight, and friends, as well as Charles Mills and our dear friend Edward Tverdick, who sat quietly listening, deferring to us raucous women. Gradually, the group dispersed. As Charles and Ed got up to go, I said, wait a minute, you didn't take a turn. So those of us who were left sat in Carrie's living room and continued our stories and remembrances. Today, when I look at that inscription, recognizing a sibling in struggle, and remember Charles's face as he spoke of his connection to Sandy, I now sense another layer of acknowledgement of both the inner struggle and the solidarity forged by those who were never meant to be sitting together around that seminar table. Thinking back to what you take with you in your go bag, for good trouble or bad, as Octavia Butler and John Lewis might say, be sure to include your favorite volume by Charles Mills. And it should include the ones coming out that we now know about, thanks to Linda. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Abby. And thanks for being with us here tonight. Next on the list that we have is Charles Simon Aaron. Is Charles on the Zoom?
Yes,
cool. Good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Yes. Well, I anticipated wonderful salutations to Charles's skills, his talents, his character, and his accomplishments. So, but what I wanted to say is Charles's sojourn in the city of Toronto as a graduate student is little known. But when he was here, yes, he was also like an external member of the Jamaican Workers' Party, but he was also a member of many community initiatives in the Black community and progressive, white progressive community at the same time. And one of them was the early days of the formation of the Black Action Defense Committee. I don't know if any of you are aware of it. If you check Wikipedia, you will see it. It was, in a sense, the Black Lives Matter of Toronto before Black Lives Matter, way back in the mid-1980s. The city of Toronto was wrecked by a series of police shootings, Buddy Evans, Albert Johnson, Michael Wade Lawson, Les Donaldson, and all the shootings really could be corrected in the eyes of commonsensical intervention by ordinary folk. But the police in those days took the extreme to solve mental health problems, youth misbehavior, et cetera, Charles was a witness. And with him present, along with Dudley Laws, Charles Roach, Sharona Hall, and Leonard Farrell, Darry Mead, and Akua Benjamin, the Black Action Defense Committee was formed. And this committee housed the political intelligentsia of the Black community in the 1980s. When I met him, he was a graduate student at the time at the University of Toronto, and I was told by a dear friend of his, Sakaya Thomas, who was also a member of the Jamaican Workers' Party and other leftist parties, which shall not be named at the time. And through Sakai, I got to meet Charles, and the word was, watch him. He's a brilliant man, but, just be careful what you say around him, because the man's serious, boy, and he will mess you up in public if you step out the line, So that was the word about Charles. So what I wanted to say is like, what happened? You see, the Black Action Defense Committee became in 1988, in its formation, and around 1990, the provincial governments formed the Special Investigations Unit as a result of the initiatives of African working class peoples and professional middle class intellectuals. And that was the first initiative in the English speaking world to hold the police accountable. And the police as an institutional body in this country have never forgotten the struggles of the Black community and the Black political leaderships. Charles was lucky. He came to Toronto roughly around the early 90s, and he was telling me that he was writing a book, which became The Racial Contract. And he asked me to buy a book by Joseph Ben Yakinen. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Mr. Ben Yakinen, but this was, I said to myself, it's not a philosophy book, Charles. It's not philosophy. Like, dude, why are you reading this book? He said, man, look, just get the book for me. I know why I need it. And it's something I need it for. So I got the book. We sat down and we talked in a Caribbean roti shop on Bathurst Street, 2 doors down from the bookstore itself. And he said to me, because I'm younger than him, I don't know if you can notice that. At the time, I was doing my own PhD at York University. And he said to me, listen, man, when he was trying to get his paper together, get his life together to get ready to go to America to study, to teach at Oklahoma, he said, Charles, I have to go before the Secret Service. I said, what, you? He said, yes, man. He said, why? When the people sit me down, them know everything. Them know everything about me. I sat there and my eye just pop out my head when them tell me what me to do where I was, the apartment I live in, the people I know. I said, Lord have mercy, boy. I didn't know until many years later, upon reflection, that what Charles was saying is, listen, my friend, if they know this much about me, they know just as much about you. Be careful. And he was saying it also by extension with a small community of professionals, academic wannabes at the time, all of whom suffered in different ways. I can mention several names to come to mind. One worked at one of the downtown universities in Toronto for 20 years, PhD, several books. And he only was allowed to renew his contract, his teaching contract, every year for 20 years. He was never given a full-time position. He applied to another institution, and I guess they felt he had suffered enough, and he was hired to be an associate, he's assistant, now associate professor. Another professor taught social work at a downtown university, and she told me a story. She had over 300 students in a first-year class in social work, and she was never given a graduate assistant. And I reflect upon that at this time, and I said, you know, Charles was somewhat lucky because his father, Gladstone Mills, was well known in Jamaica. Charles could speak to Mr. Manley, Michael Manley at that time, on a first name basis. He could say Mr. Manley, and Michael Manley is in the Caribbean, Mr. Big, you know, Edward Siaga and such political acolytes he would know and know them well. Many of the famous people in Jamaica know Mr. Mills and know of Charles Mills on a first name basis. So he was lucky because the Canadian state did not want to, you know, interfere with the cozy relationship it had with the Jamaican ruling elite. And I think Charles was protected, but the rest of us suffered much. I say that to say that he came out of something when he was here, that he didn't just read philosophy and thought philosophy and write philosophy. He was involved in this community of African peoples. And I say it because something happened in Toronto that led to his thinking on racial liberalism. And this was in formation way back in the 1980s, Mises, right? It is that here you are living in one of the most esteemed liberal capitalisms in the world. And it is falling short of meeting the gap between law de jure and law de facto. So here are we, African Canadians, fighting against wrongs in civil society and being told by the actions of the state that what we were doing was wrong and the punishment we were receiving was appropriate. Although white peoples who were doing exactly the same, the feminist movement fighting for abortion rights, the trade union movement, native peoples, etc., the environmental movement, they were fighting, but they were not getting what we were getting. And that gap is what inspired Charles to ask the very simple question: why is it that Black people, when they act politically, incur the wrath of the state in the manner in which that small subsection of Africans in the city of Toronto, who took to the streets to protest against police brutality, were treated? This liberalism was the liberalism through which modern Jamaica and its enslaved ancestors emancipated themselves. So what is it about this liberalism that makes it incapable of embracing the challenges to it by African peoples, right? Such that it denies them the rights it so easily accords to others, especially those who are white. And Charles was dealing with this in the 1980s when he was in the city. So when he went to the United States and he sent me an essay that he wrote on the Grenadian struggle, he came to York University. I organized a speech for him at York, and he gave the speech, and you could feel the sprinklings of this debate within himself about rights, liberalism, and was it possible for emancipation, such as the sharing of wealth and some measure of social equalitarianism, to occur within the context and confines of a liberal democratic state. He was working this through. And I challenged him once. And I said, Charles, you know, if you're making all this critique of liberalism, can liberalism itself as a political philosophy emancipate those who are its victims? And he said, yes. And I you know, coming from where I'm coming from politically, I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And he said, yes, Charles, liberalism has within it the capacity to correct its wrongs. Its deficit is a deficit of will. Methinks, in debate with him, even though he's still there and I'm working it through with him, is that if liberalism was to emancipate itself on its own terms, it would become something else, which to me would be socialism. That's how I see it, right? But he held the ground, he held the gates against that and says within a liberal context, you can get sufficient distribution of wealth and resources to preserve the common good. And I say, you know, he's passed. Many people that I've spoken to in Toronto who knew him back then are all in shock. I told them I was going to give this talk tonight. I'm doing it on their behalf to say, look, bro, he was here. We knew him. We learned a lot from him. We struggled with him. We were impressed by him. We were all immigrants to this country. And as immigrants, we're so glad that he succeeded in the United States of America as an immigrant tale. But more importantly than anything is that he got the job done. The books are there for us to read. We're all much better because of it. And to give you one more story before I go. In 2017, he published a book, Black Rights. I got it here. You got the Black Rights, White Wrongs. And he sent me an email to say, look, Charles, I'm coming to town. I'm giving a talk at the University of Toronto School of Philosophy. I'd like you to be there and bring anyone else along that you know from back in the day. So I showed up to this meeting. All the professors were there, almost all male. I think there were like 2 or 3 women. That says a lot, right? And Charles gives this presentation on John Rawls. I sat there and I was astounded. I couldn't believe what I was listening to. In the intermission, I said to him, listen, Charles, buddy, I got a question I want to put to you, okay? So get ready for it. The debate started and Charles proceeded to answer the questions from the floor. The overwhelmingly white male professoriate were in a state of apoplexy. They were stunned, they were shocked, they were uneasy. Some were close to tears, some were hyper anxious to get out of there. And I refused to ask the question. I said, I wrote him a letter afterwards. I said, listen, Charles, this is a question I wanted to ask, but I think I've got the answer. But this is what I witnessed. And I felt tremendously protective of him because some of those professors were so angry at the decapitation or decapitationist deconstruction of John Rawls that he offered. They had no rebuttal because essentially they were trapped. They were teaching John Rawls and never saw in the 20, 25 years, many of them had been teaching Rawls, never saw the deficits of Rawls on the question of race that Charles Mills brought forward. And he was exhaustively comprehensive. I bought the book, I read it, and I wrote to him and I said, bro, you did the job. I don't know how John Rawls can be taught in North American universities any longer without Charles Mills's critique alongside of it. I just don't know how you can do it anymore. You know, and I made it a point, I have to read Rawls on his own terms. I only read him as most people would for an essay here and there along the way. But after that demolition job by Charles Mills, I said, Lord have mercy, Rawls is dead. And Charles Mills killed him. So folks, thank you all very much. I want to hear what everyone else has to say, right? And peace.
Thank you so much, Charles, for that. I was again so grateful for all those stories and just the fleshing out of the man and the activist that Charles was. So just to as speakers are sharing their memories and thoughts on Charles, folks are coming in. So just to remind folks who are probably just coming in, the protocol is that if you would like to say a few words in memory of Charles, please send a private message to Lee Johnson. She is my co-host for this event, letting her know that you'd like to speak and we will put you on the list. So we do have a running list at this point. So So next on that list, we have Jordan Botello. Is Jordan on the call?
Yeah,
Yes,
Jordan.
yes, cool.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jordan Boteo. I'm going to read mine too, because I've been a mess. Charles is the reason why I came to the Graduate Center. I'm finishing up my first year. So this is a pretty devastating loss for me. I first learned about Charles when I was seeking an understanding of why the racism I experienced as a native, as a Chicano, and observed in the world was so pervasive. And Charles's writings came to me and they were clear, they were profound, and they were tightly argued as he challenged his readers to examine the impact of white supremacy on our ways of knowing, on our racial identities, and on the philosophical canon itself. I got to meet Charles first at a conference after Chike Jeffers connected us. He was sitting waiting for me in that same jean jacket that everyone keeps talking about. And he spent most of our time together busting out jokes that was mad funny. Like he had me and my wife falling off the couch. He found out we were from Texas. He asked us if we ate steak for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And he always had jokes. The rest of the days of the conference, he made sure to introduce me to every other philosopher he knew that worked on race, that worked on Latinx philosophy, indigenous philosophy. And later, he was gracious enough to agree to be the keynote speaker at the Texas Tech graduate conference. And so I got to collaborate with him over the course of a year. Charles was the one who called me and told me that I'd been accepted to the PhD program at the Graduate Center, that he'd read my work and that he was excited to be working with me in the future. I was able to take the last seminar that he ever taught. And because the course was virtual, this was a rare chance to see some of the finest Black graduate students and their philosophical minds in America engage with Charles. I mean, you're talking about people from all over the country. And it was a marvel to see his mind in action as he deftly responded to the powerful criticisms of his work that were launched in that seminar. He invited us to read unpublished essays that he was working on, and he also spilled the tea on some of the greatest philosophy beefs that had happened. But that stays in the seminar. My best friend is from Jamaica, and when I got to introduce them, they chopped it up and they cracked jokes in their Jamaican patois. They had an immediate connection since they were both Yard boys from the Rock, as Charles put it. And these are memories that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. I was still working on my final paper for that course. Charles was kind enough to grant me an extension after I lost lots of friends and family because of the pandemic. His books have been a permanent fixture here on my desk. I'm looking at the racial contract right now. And I turn to them often, sometimes for scholarly reference, but usually to be inspired to write with style. Down here in Texas, we would call his style fire, as Tobin Wigwe says. My heart's broken that the world lost an eminent Black philosopher, the professor who I was going to ask to advise me, and a beautiful human being. And may we carry on his legacy. Rest in power, Charles.
Thank you so much, Jordan. And, all our hearts are with you, and we're sending you hugs and wish you much peace in this time. And we hear every word that you're saying. So thank you for sharing that and for being with us. All right, so the next three speakers that I have. All right, I'm unmuted. So we have the next three is Angela Wellman, Susan Bryson, and Sabine Brock. So Angela, we'll invite you to unmute if you're on the call. Not sure if she is. Lee, if you can do a background check, that would be great.
I don't see Angela here yet.
Okay, all right, so we'll circle back. So maybe we'll bring in Susan Bryson.
Thank you, Chris. I'm deeply moved. I emailed Lee to say I'm not speaking after all. I'm just very grateful to be here with all of you.
Okay, well, we're grateful that you're with us too. So thanks for sharing this space with us. Sabine, is Sabine on the call? Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Apologies if I'm not. Okay, so I think that is also a name we'll move forward from. We'll circle back. So maybe we can invite I can invite my friend Alfred Prettyman. I think I did see Al. Al, do you want to unmute? So you can speak.
Here I am.
Cool. So the floor is yours, Al.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read two for obvious reasons, and it'll be brief. There are those whose convivial personality so readily puts us at our ease that we might be slow to realize that we are in the presence of a uniquely great spirit. That was my realization the first time I met Charles. Naturally, I had read The Racial Contract and immediately incorporated it in teaching my courses on the history of social thought. His analysis and insight were so lucidly argued that I reveled in its reshaping of the self-serving philosophy of Hobbes and Locke, who had skin in the game for propounding their particular theory of a social contract. Along with Black rights, white wrongs, and its comprehensive and passionate critique of racial liberalism, I was loaded for bear in our renewed discussions of liberalism in my history of social thought courses, thanks to Charles. So when I met Charles and spoke with him over time, I was bound to like him. My next older brother was named Charles. What struck me most about him and has stayed with me was a shyness I saw in him, as well as his unselfishness. So thank you, Charles, for changing our lives and for the radiance of that smile of yours. So long, Charles. I'll see you in the morning.
Thank you so much, Al, for that. We appreciate you sharing your memories of him with us and the time you took to be with us tonight. So we have, again, as folks are coming in, I should probably say again, if you would like to share your memories of Charles or honor him with your words, please do send a message to Lee Johnson, who is my co-host. Lee will put you on our list and she will ping me to let me know that you are indeed on our list. So for those who are just now coming in, that's the protocol for tonight. So we have next on our list, and what is now the last on my list, at least as it stands, is Teofilo. If I'm mispronouncing that name, I am so sorry. Is Teofilo on the call?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, good.
So
the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'll read it too. So in progressive political Brazilian circles, it is customary to honor those who recently passed away by saying their name followed by the word presente, to express that the person is with us. But the word presente also means gift. And this is how I want to remember Charles Mills's life and legacy as a gift to the world. I first encountered The Racial Contract in 2013. The book left a deep impression on me, rescuing me from logic, no offenses intended, logicians, showing me how to do philosophy of race at the highest level. Then came Blackness Visible and other books and papers by Charles Mills, which enchanted me with the strength of argumentation, elegance of writing, and unique creativity. Since 2018, when I moved to New York to begin my PhD at CUNY Graduate Center, I've been privileged to work with Charles and got to know him better. I got to see a kind, generous, and caring person with the best sense of humor. Charles helped me to adjust to a new academic culture by directing me to relevant literature, making detailed comments on my drafts, or just chatting informally and laughing. For sure, I had every intention to have Charles on my dissertation committee. Unfortunately, there's no more time for that. I also intended to organize a conference in Brazil and have Charles speak there. He only visited the country once in 2018, and he fell in love with Rio de Janeiro. I can tell because he showed me the photos he took there 3 or 4 times. Unfortunately, there's no time to set that conference either. But there's still time for us to keep doing what Charles knew how to do so well. Use philosophy to bring about a better world, to create a non-ideal, but still just society. Charles W. Mills, presente.
Thank you so much for that. All right, so next on our list, so the list is growing. It's now growing in real time. So thanks to all of you who are moved to speak. I'd like to invite Kamisha Russell to unmute herself, and the floor is yours, Kamisha.
Hi. Thank
Hey.
you so much for organizing this. The news hit me hard this week, as I'm sure it did everybody else. I didn't prepare something I probably should have, but I guess intellectually, obviously such an amazing example. And for me, racial contract really epitomizes what I think about as critical philosophy of race, that this use of philosophy to make these critical interventions and to really uncover the way that philosophy has supported racism and racial hierarchy, and also the way that the tools of philosophy can stand to help us understand the problems and have an impact on how we treat them. I have taught the book often. I taught it in the spring of this year. My students always are very impressed by it. It's such a wonderful example of theory and just really concrete examples that I think my students can really see and be, see clearly, but yet be really kind of blown away by in the way that he was able to name and describe things that in retrospect are almost obvious, but yet are so, clarifying when you read them. I taught it once. I taught a class on social and political philosophy and focused on contract theory, and decided, we're just gonna, read a few contract theorists, and then we're just gonna spend the rest of the time reading the social contract or the racial contract. And I believe one of my advisors said that was a ridiculous plan, but it actually worked out very well. It worked out, very well with my students, I think. Anyway, it's a go-to book for me for just helping students understand what we mean when we're talking about philosophy and race, when we're thinking about these two things together. Just more personally, he was just such a wonderful presence. I remember he had a story, and I think it's in one of his essays too, in a collection about Latinx and Black philosophers. But the story of the APA in the early days when it was like walking into a snowstorm or an Arctic snowstorm, I think he would say, and you're sort of, the whiteness is blowing at you and you're trying to kind of forge ahead. and he would move his body as he would tell this story. And he talked about, sort of going down to the basement and like having to knock in a special way on the door to get into the room where a small number of Black philosophers would be gathered in a panel that was maybe unadvertised, So he had just this way of talking about, these huge problems in philosophy about how it operates, but in a way that was so funny and just so so inspiring. When I sorry, it's my dog. When I saw him at an APA a number of years ago, and I was with my wife, and we saw him in, I think, at a mixer or something like that, and I introduced him, which it's always amazing when someone like Charles remembers you and talks to you, like he just, like, someone that amazing could think that you sort of still in grad school are memorable. So that was, I was very flattered anyway. But he asked my partner if she was in philosophy, and she said, "Oh no, I'm a librarian." He said, "Oh, that's good, it's better not to have two academics together." So so my partner thinks of him fondly and thinks of how he gave his blessing to our relationship. Anyway, just such a wonderful person and a wonderful theorist, and such an influence for me on how I think about what we're doing here in philosophy, and why we stay in this field that is sometimes like a highly inhospitable Arctic blizzard.
Mhm. Thank you, Kamisha, for that, and for reminding us how easy of a person Charles was to, it's like you approach him and it's like, oh, it's Charles Mills, and then it's like, oh, it's Charles Mills. And I think we all have some version of that story to share, for those of us who are a bit of in the younger generation and didn't have the blessing of like coming into philosophy with him. So thanks for sharing that. We appreciate it. So let me get back to my list. So now I would like to ask Margaret McLaren if she's on the call to unmute. The floor is yours, Margaret.
Yes, I am. Thanks, Chris. And my remarks aren't prepared because I just messaged Lee to add me to the list. So, but it follows well from what Kamisha said. So I was hard struck too when I learned that Charles had died on Monday. And from the time I met Charles, so I still remember the very first time I met Charles. I met him at a conference. It was either the APA or SPEP, but probably the APA. Sandra Bartke introduced us. They were both their typical generous, welcoming selves. I was still a graduate student, so I'm not actually in the younger generation of philosophers, but I was younger than Charles. And from that time on, so to the next time I met Charles, so it's just a short, funny story. So the next time I met Charles at a conference, so I went to the APA and SPEP regularly, so I'd see him a few times a year. From the time I met him, so in 1990, Racial Contract wasn't published yet, but Charles was already well known. He was already, a professor, and I was a graduate student. So I saw him at the next conference, and he remembered me, right? He remembered my name, and he remembered what I worked on. And I was astounded, because that level of attention and generosity to someone that he had no official connection with really at all was astounding. And I said, I actually was, I blurted out, well, I'm surprised you remember me, and he said, yes, in philosophy, you're nobody till you have a book, with his Charles laugh. I can't do the Charles laugh, but it just, and that was before, his book. And it just, I've never forgotten. And ever since I met him 31 years ago, at every conference I went to, Charles and I had a conversation, and every time he gave a paper, I went to his papers. He was unfailingly brilliant and unfailingly kind. And I saw him mentor generations and generations of philosophers of color and marginalized philosophers. I had to go get my racial contract, and it does say to a sister in struggle, like Abby and I was not at his institution in Chicago, but I was a grad student at Northwestern. So he was local. We were in the same place for a couple of years, but I think one of the reasons, Charles work will persist and it will continue to be important. It's been tremendously important to me. It's, it's shaped the field. I mean, it's sort of like an understatement to say that it shaped like an individual's work, because it shaped the field of political philosophy and philosophy of race. But what I'll miss, I think I just expected to see Charles at every conference I ever went to. So the fact that he had died, it just really never occurred to me that a person, that warm and that beautiful and that smart, would pass away. So I'm just glad that there's a memorial and to remember Charles in all his humanness, because he was just an amazing person. Thanks.
Thank you, Margaret. I think you put into words what all of us are feeling. Like, how can someone so full of life and love and spirit just not be here? So yeah, I said today to someone that, Charles made humaning look beautiful and easy, and I think that's kind of the zone that everybody's comments and memories are sort of pointing towards. So, all right. So I'm going to stay in with my moderator hat on, because I'm going to lose it. I'd like to invite next Lucius Outlaw. Lucius, if you're on the call, can you unmute? And the floor is yours. Right.
I didn't see that coming.
I'm sorry, but not really, but because we'd love to hear you say some things about Charles.
Well, let me gather myself for a moment and finish a text message to someone who's saying, well, I won't stay if you're not going to say anything. And I was going to say, well, I'm not saying anything. And then you called on me.
It sounds like we might want to circle back to you. Would that be helpful, or let me know?
Just, I am listening and learning about Charles, things that I did not know. So I'm grateful for the persons who are sharing things about his life that I did not know. We met way back when he was at Oklahoma. I did not have any detailed information about his time in Canada or his life in Jamaica before coming to the US. So I'm very grateful. My thanks to you and all involved for organizing this and providing a case for us to commiserate together about Charles's life and his untimely death. My thanks to Linda and to the whole support team for the loving care that you all provided to Charles all the way to the end. I'll just say what others have said, but the full stock of this is yet to be taken. In the words of the sociologist of philosophy, Randall Collins, Charles altered the attention space of social and political philosophy and of academic philosophy in general. He altered the attention space. He reconfigured how we had to think about certain kinds of things. I once wrote a letter in support of his being considered for an appointment and said that if he had not been Black, the racial contract book might well have positioned him for consideration for a Nobel Peace Prize. That it was that significant. I anticipate having more to say about that thanks to an effort organizing, especially efforts to write about the racial contract 25 years after its publication. There's more to be said. I'm still working my way toward what I might say as I re-engage with that text, now weighted down by the heavy feeling of the loss of Charles in our lives. But the landscape is different intellectually and in many other ways by Charles having been amongst us and sharing his thinking and his articulation of things. And as some have said, after the murder of not Fidel Castro, but of the revolutionary in Cuba who was killed and blocked on his name, Yes, he's dead. Let us get up off our knees, sharpen our machetes, and continue to struggle. Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Lou. We appreciate it. And apologies again for misrecognizing you on the list, but we really appreciate all of the things that you had to say. So thank you so much. So next on our list, I'd like to invite Sybil Anderson, to unmute herself. The floor is yours, Sybil.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Lee, for hosting us. And thanks everybody for being here. One of the things, I'm just so grateful for this opportunity. I've been thinking about Charles for the last couple of days. I didn't work with him very closely. I didn't know him very well. But one of the things that really struck me over the last few days is how many of us have a story about an interaction with him. And so Margaret, your comment, unfailingly brilliant, unfailingly kind, we, all of us on this call are a part of the work that Linda talked with us about. I mean, that to realize, to see how multifaceted the work is, the work was and continues to be for him. So the philosophizing, the political activism, but the relationship to all of us that he encountered, whether we were students of his, whether we were people he met at a conference, just really striking. And so my own story is of being in grad school at Memphis with Chris and others on the call, and he gave a lecture, and I had the great honor of driving him to dinner, and of course he was interested in what I wanted to do, mentoring a student that he had just met, so I was telling him what I hoped and dreamed to do with philosophy, and he said, "Get tenure first." So just a wonderful, wonderful human. As Teo said, a gift, just an absolute stunning gift to all of us. So thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you, Sybil, for sharing that. I too remember that. I think Charles was the first speaker that I had an opportunity to hear in my capacity as a graduate student. And yeah, so you took me back to that space. I've been going back to that space a lot since, remembering him and how wonderful he was as a person. So, so looking at my list, so Sybil is the last that we have on the list, at least so far, or thus far. Lee, jump in if I'm wrong about that. I see a hand, at least a hand that's on my screen, and it belongs to Adriana. So why don't we invite you to come on in?
Thank you so much. Thank you for organizing this, and thank you, Linda, for sharing everything that you shared and for all that you did. I have been very sad since learning of Charles's passing. I'm an anthropologist here, snuck in amongst the philosophers, and I just want to share a story with you about how I met Charles and how we became friends, which is that I in my first year as an assistant professor of anthropology, I went to Jamaica for the first time to a conference at University of the West Indies in Mona, and I gave a paper based on my dissertation, which took up the demands of students at the University of Puerto Rico who were on strike, and tried to think through the gender and queer politics of those student strikes and their implications for the political future of Puerto Rico. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I think my queer paper made a lot of people very uncomfortable in the room. And Charles knew that. And so at lunch, I actually sat down next to him, and he looked at me. I'll never forget this. He turned and looked at me and he said, "Madam, you have given a radical presentation." And I just thought that was the funniest thing to say. And we got to talking, and we had such a good time together that night. He said, "Let's go. I'm going to take you around Kingston." And he drove me around in this little tiny car. And I had the privilege of having him show me different parts of Kingston, which I had never seen. And I remember that he was so amused by explaining to me that although there were goats in the medians that had apparently no owners, that I should be sure that they did in fact have owners. And I would very soon encounter them if I were to hit one of those goats driving down the road. So I remember he told me that story several times. After that, he was incredibly kind and supportive. He wrote me letters of recommendation. I would call him and talk to him about what I was doing. And it was always like getting ready for a workout to talk to him, because he was so incisive, the way he would just cut through all my bullshit, everything that I was trying to hide or dissimulate. He was just right on there. He could see right through me. And I so appreciated that about him. I admired him so greatly. Thank you so much, Charles, for having been who you were. And thanks to all of you.
Okay, now that I am not muted, thank you so much for sharing that story with us. We appreciate it. We appreciate you being here. So so in collaborating with my co-host / comrade, so it's right at 8:15. I think we're about an hour and 15 minutes in, which is around the halfway mark. So what we want to do now, so Lee was wonderful enough to curate a bit of a show for us, just a snippet of pictures and bits of Charles's voice giving various talks, so we can hear his voice. So we're gonna play a bit of that just to kind of give this space and give ourselves some space to breathe. And while that's playing, if you can, I see some Zoom hands. But if for those of you who do want to speak, just because I think we're at 277 people, so it's kind of hard to keep track on which Zoom hand was up first. So if you can please send a private message to Lee Johnson to let her know that you want to be put on the list to speak. And then when we come back, when we play this very short clip, we'll go to that list and we'll bring folks in. Does that sound like a plan? So Lee, I don't know where you are on my screen.
Yeah, I'm here. There you
go.
That does sound like a plan. And I just want to say again, thank you for everyone being here. I've been kind of on the back end of this event, the chat end. I hope I'm getting everybody who wants to speak. It's a little bit overwhelming, but we just wanted to play this sort of short clip, which I think that you will all appreciate. It's a classic Charles moment, just to give everyone a chance to take a breath. And also, again, if you have, as people have been speaking, if you feel moved to speak, please just send a private message to me or to Chris, and we will get you on the list. So let me just share this.
Can you guys hear me? Well, to begin with, Eduardo, thanks for all those lies. I'll pay you later. Okay, seriously, it's great to be here. It's my first time at Stony Brook, so I'm really delighted that to get the invitation from Eduardo, and obviously under these circumstances, to be doing this distinguished lecture as part of this great series you guys have. Now, I don't know what your own experience with philosophy talks has been, but my own experience is that I tend to fall asleep halfway through, or for the real interesting ones, maybe 3/4 of the way through. So anyway, because of that, as a sort of means of survival, and you have been around for a long time, I'm a great believer in handouts, since the idea is that at the end of the lecture, when you have nodded off and somebody's sort of sticking in the ribs, stop snoring, at least you have a handout in your hand. You can then go home, so the entire evening was not a loss. So in that spirit, I've had Eduardo make up a whole bunch, though maybe not enough. So if we could have some volunteers, so we can.
I know anyone who's ever been to a lecture by Charles has his handouts. So I thought that was such a great capture of the moment. But Chris, you have been an absolutely tireless host and fantastic hostess. I'm going to hand it back to you. I think you have a list. So
Yes. So I think I have a list. I think I have a list in the order that it's supposed to be. So I think, forgive me if this isn't the case, but I think that the next person who would like the floor is Devonia Havis. Is that right, Lee?
I believe that is right. Yes.
Awesome. Devonia, are you here? You can.
I am here. That's kind of. Hi. That's
Hi.
kind of shocking. Very quickly, everyone has eloquently talked about Charles's intellect, the power of his philosophy, and I want to start with the Nikki Giovanni quote as a way to talk about what made Charles even more special to me as a Black woman in the world of philosophy. And Nikki Giovanni writes, "It is not unusual to know a man through those who loved him, not by his actions alone." And for me, that was one of the most powerful examples that Charles gave to me, how to be in a community and think with others and build community. And in a world, in a disciplinary world where people are so committed to the critique, to tearing other people down, he managed to blend very intense and deep thought with his compassion and community building. And it is a possibility model for me that I always look to. And the more I do this as a teacher, as a continuing student, he's a touchstone to look to for how to do this in a way that has integrity and ethics and commitments to that liberatory process. So I just want to honor that rare quality among the many others. So thank you.
Thanks, Devonia. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely unusual in our field, and just delightfully so, right? Just what makes him the beautiful soul that he is. So thank you for sharing that and for being with us. I think next on our list is Catherine Sophia Bell. Catherine, are you here? Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm here. Hello,
Hey.
everyone. I love you so much, Chris. Thank you,
I love
Chris.
you back.
Yes, thank you for organizing this, Chris and Lee and Linda. So much love to you. Thank you so much for all the ways that you loved and cared for Charles and shared our love with him on our behalf. Thank you for all that you did and all that you do. I want to say, first of all, I feel like the University of Memphis should have been paying Charles as a visiting distinguished professor, because I think many of us who went to Memphis had our first encounter with him there. And that was also the case with me. But I want to share, there are many stories I could share about my experiences with Charles, but one in particular that I would like on the record has to do with the Collegium of Black Women Philosophers. So I am the founding director of that organization, and Charles played a role in me founding that organization. So my first tenure track job was at Vanderbilt University. Charles Mills was giving a talk at Vanderbilt University, and we were talking like right after his talk, or maybe during a reception or something like that. And so he said, "So Catherine, what's going on with the Black women philosophers? What's happening with Black women in philosophy?" And I said, "I don't know, somebody should really organize something and get something together, because I would love to be a part of that. Like we should have some kind of organization." And he said, "Catherine, you're at Vanderbilt. They have money. You should spend their money." And I was like, "You're right. I should spend their money." And so I was able to put together a proposal, and there were some other people who collaborated with me on that proposal. but Charles was the one who said, like, spend Vanderbilt's money. They have it and spend it. And this was a time where you would ask, you know, for one amount and they would say, no, you don't need that amount. You need twice that amount in order to do this. So thank you so much to Charles Mills and that nudging and encouragement to start something for Black women in philosophy. And I was able to found Collegium of Black women philosophers in 2007 at Vanderbilt, and it's been going strong ever since. So I would like the record to show the role that Charles Mills played in the founding of that organization. Thank you all for listening and for gathering together in his memory.
Thank you, Catherine. I've heard that story a couple of times and it never gets old, right? It would still be something that he would say, like, there's the money, get it done. So, so thanks for sharing that with everyone in this space, and thanks for being here. Right, so next on my list, I have Carlos Pasmino. Again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing, but Carlos, if you can unmute, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. My signal's not so great, so I'm going to be very brief with my comments. I knew Charles just purely on an academic basis, and obviously, besides his brilliant mind and his incredible body of work, especially through the racial contract, Charles was a fantastic pen pal. When I was an undergrad at the City College of New York, I reached out to him so he could help me with my dissertation on social contract theory. And I hated that class. There was not a class that I hated more than social contract theory, just for the sheer whiteness of it and the complete absence of diverse voices. And one of my colleagues at City College asked me to reach out to Charles because of his body of work, the racial contract. So I emailed him and I asked him for some insight, maybe some recommendations. He said, well, first of all, have you read my book? And secondly, have you read Rawls? And I said, yeah, I'm not a big fan of The Veil of Ignorance. He was like, don't worry about it. You're in a good space. And I think what struck me from his help on my project was his generosity of time and his quick wit and his just sheer intelligence. I wish I'd gotten to know. I wish I'd got to know him better. When I found that he was going to teach at the Graduate Center in CUNY, that was a big influence to attend to some of his lectures and some of his works. And when I found out he passed, I just felt it was an incredible loss, not only to the world of philosophy, but also to the world of, it's a very niche world, obviously, of the scholarship of social contract theory. So that's all I have to say. And obviously his impact, as small as it was to my life, meant a lot. And it is incredible to learn more about him and his work and his contribution to the left. So thank you.
Thank you, Carlos, for sharing that with us and just for sharing this space with us. We appreciate that you're here. So thank you for that. So next on our list is Shayla Wadwani. Shayla, are you?
I'm here. Thank you so much.
Cool.
I'm so happy to see everyone here, even under these conditions. And actually, the short video that we watched is so appropriate because it's that talk that I went to where I first met Charles. And I wanted to share just gratitude for his just wonderful, disarming way of like pointing you out and recognizing you in a room. I think many of us have felt this. And it was at that talk at Stony Brook when, it was after a particularly hard day as a master's student. And I think we've all had these days as graduate students where, that's it, it's over. You're going to return your books to the library and call it quits. And so, I had one of those days. I was like, okay, I'll take these books home and read them, but I'll go to this talk first. Because it's going to be great. It's Charles Mills. And there weren't very many people in the room. And after the recording was over, he asked who was in philosophy. You know, he pointed to the people of color in the room. He was like, is anyone in philosophy? And I was the only one. And he said, you know, when radical philosophers go to conferences, in the early days, there were only so many of us. And so we would all have to take separate kinds of transportation. Because if we were all, you know, there were so few of us, if the plane went down, that would be the entire discipline. That would be like all of us in one go. And those were really kind of knowing words. And whenever I would see him at SPEP or at conferences, generally after, you know, a train ride or a bus to a train, I would see him and we wouldn't really share too many words, just hello and, you know, shake a hand, but there would be this knowing, disarming glance from across the room, you know, like this, just a felt tap on the shoulder. And it was lovely to be seen and recognized by Charles. And I hope to see you all in a space soon, but not on the same airplane. Thank you.
Thank you, Shayla, for that. Yes, and I just echo that. It just felt lovely and wholesome to be seen and recognized by Charles in a space that was often quite alienating. So thank you for sharing that with us, and thanks for being here. We appreciate it. Where's my list? So next on my list is Joy He. And I hope I'm doing all right by your pronunciation. Joy, are you on the call? Can you unmute yourself?
Joy Cox.
I apologize.
No, it's okay.
Thank you for being with us. The floor is yours.
Indeed. I didn't prepare anything, and I'm just trying to keep myself together, as is the case with most of us. It's been a week. I actually had another Jamaican friend pass this week as well. And I can't help to think that he and Charles are laughing together right now, because my friend was a proponent of healthy masculinity and had many words to say. So yes, I met Charles Mills when I was just starting my grad school. I thought I found his work, The Racial Contract, was taught in a course, and I was blown away immediately. He was a rock star. And the fact that I was able to see him in person, listen to his words in person, and then shake his hand and ask him a question in person, I thought, oh gosh, this can't be reality. And of course, I wrote my thesis trying to dismantle the racial contract in some kind of way, because that's what my advisor was telling me I needed to change it too. And so I remember asking him, why did he choose race? Why, with this beautiful framework, did he only choose race? And he laughed and said, because he could. And it was so much more than that, you know, speaking, listening to him speak, reading his works after that. Of course, there's a lot more to that, but he didn't take the route of belaboring a racial point of, come on, sister, this is what we're supposed to do. This is the fight to be fought. No, that wasn't the point to get across. It's because he could. And to say that his work changed my life intellectually is an understatement. The fact that I get to sit here and listen to so many beautiful words and stories and memories, and it's just, this is why I did philosophy, to affect real change, to affect real people. And what he showed me as that baby grad student was that real people were still doing philosophy. We're still doing philosophical work. We're still doing that hard work internally in order to make something on the outside a little bit different. And that was absolutely amazing. So all I can say is just gratitude. Thank you all so much for confirming this feeling that started then Thank you to his spirit for doing what it was here to do. And yes, thank you so much just for a moment for allowing me to share just a little bit.
We want to thank you too, Joy. I mean, as much as you express gratitude, you know, we're grateful to you, because every time we hear these stories confirmed, right? Like Charles's presence gets bigger and bigger in our midst, and really, this is kind of what it's all about, right? It's up to us to keep him alive and keep him here, and that's kind of what we're doing. So, thanks to you, Joy, for adding your bit in that project of making Charles presente, right? All right, Chris, keep it together. All right, next on our list is Corey Wong. Is Corey still on the call? Can I invite them to unmute?
Yeah,
the floor is yours. Cool.
It's so good to be with you all here. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, and Lee and Chris, and for organizing, and everybody who was with Charles. I wasn't prepared to speak, but I've been thinking a lot about Charles, as I do actually on a regular basis, even though I'm kind of outside of the professional philosophy world. But the reason why Charles is so important to me is because I was one of the original, like early cohorts of Pixie, 2007 at Penn State. So when I was a junior, barely turned 21, didn't know what I was doing, didn't even know really what philosophy was. I had some advisors who encouraged me to do Pixie, and I was admitted, to my dismay and shock. That was such a life-changing experience for that class. Like, I know that those programs have been life-changing, but I feel like the 2007 Pixie was like legendary, partially because I was barely 21, reading The Racial Contract, having my mind blown, not knowing what philosophy was, being like raised up in Idaho, learning about global white supremacy and epistemology of ignorance, like truly changed my life. But then Charles was one of the lecturers. So when you are an undergrad not knowing what philosophy is, just as Joy said, to be able to be in the presence of the person who wrote the book that just blew your mind was an incredible experience. And just the magic of Pixie was phenomenal. But it was then I was like, I guess I'm a philosopher. I'm going to be a philosopher now. So it did what it needed to do in terms of shaping the young people in that cohort to pursue their path in philosophy. So then to fast forward from there, I applied to graduate school and was admitted both to Penn State and Northwestern, where I was intending to study under Charles had I chosen to go to Northwestern. And I was actually at the recruitment weekend, and Charles and I had some time alone, and I was really torn on the decision of where to go. And it's so bizarre to me to think about it now, but his advice, I just said plainly, like, what do you think I should do? I don't know where to go, Penn State or Northwestern. Like, here I'm talking to the man I would study with. And he said that he really thought I should probably go to Penn State because that's where I would have more support in the work that I wanted to do, which is a very interesting thing, given that, like, who wouldn't want to work with Charles? But I really appreciated his honesty and the care that, like, has come through in so many people's comments, that he was really investing more in me and my well-being, and not out of any kind of weird ego, or he just didn't want to work with me. Who knows? I'll keep with my narrative. But that was a really special connection. And then through graduate school, I kind of felt like I was on the fringes of what a philosopher was really supposed to be. I was flirting with social media, and I did a YouTube video on the epistemology of ignorance early on. And I remember sending an email with the link to Charles and saying, I just did this video of your concept that changed my life. And he responded to it. And I feel like that kind of solidified our relationship, even though he wasn't my advisor. Like, he knew that it was an important concept for me, like one of the most important concepts. And then I'm fast forwarding now to 2015. So I graduated with my PhD, left Penn State, and didn't do the professional philosophy road. So I didn't go for a tenure track position and felt like I was really gonna lose the connection to the philosophical community or even my identity as a philosopher. Like, does it count if you're not in academic professional philosophy? So I had gotten a position in administrative leadership at a university, and then just somehow convinced someone to fund me to go to my last philosophy conference, which was the Hypatia conference in 2015 in Philadelphia. And I was giving my last paper. I called it my swan song of like, I don't know what happens after this, because I don't see professional philosophy, like definitely not in my future now. And so I told this whole story of how philosophy had shaped me, the essays and the ideas and what I was doing to internalize it more into my life. And Charles was in the room. Like, he saw my name on the agenda and he came to that talk. And it was so amazing because as I'm telling my story about philosophy, of course I was telling the story about Charles and this influence that he had on me. And it was just so wonderful to know that he showed up and afterwards talked to me about, you know, the plan that I had or what I was doing with my life. And that's the picture that I have with him that I was able to share after hearing the news of his passing too. So it was just, I'm leaving even now the higher ed administrative role, and in the past year of this career transition, I've reclaimed with myself that like, I'm definitely a philosopher. That hasn't gone anywhere. It's not changing, but I just don't know where that's going to go. So I'm happy and grateful to be able to share this influence that Charles has had on my life, because it's really obvious to me that the impact he's had is beyond professional philosophy. It goes beyond the traditional routes of the ways that we engage with his work too and carry it forward. So I appreciate all the stories. Thank you for hearing me and letting me share some of my memories with Charles. And thank you all for being here in this space for community to honor him.
Thank you, Corey, for that, and for foregrounding Pixie and foregrounding Charles's connection to Pixie. That was just beautiful. So thank you for that, and thanks for being here. Where's my list? My list keeps disappearing. So next on the list is Pedro Monque. Again, so sorry if I'm butchering names. Try my best. Pedro, are you here? Yes, I see you. Hi, the floor is yours.
That was right. That was exciting. Thank you. There are some memories that speak to Charles's generosity. I remember reading The Racial Contract, and especially the White Ignorance paper when I was a junior in college. Remember thinking it was Minnesota, college, very white place. It was very steamy summer. Like, I needed to know, how do you get to know all this? And so then Charles visited St. Olaf, and he filled up the largest auditorium we had there, which was a big surprise. And so I applied to CUNY. And he was very kind before I even got there. He was one of the people who convinced me to go to CUNY. He went above and beyond. Like, on that first email, connected me to another student who spoke marvels about CUNY. And yet that first semester, I took his corrective justice class. And I remember thinking, I felt like I was at a comedy club. He would just crack up. He would like make the room crack up like 10 times every session. I mean, we would just be like rolling down the aisles, laughing at what he was saying. And it was, really difficult stuff about reparations, about racism. And it was just really impactful how his sense of humor and his warmth could just like illuminate anything. That first semester, when I was feeling really unsure about being at CUNY, he welcomed me to his office almost weekly. And I only now realize how special that was, right? In college, maybe it's normal to visit someone for office hours every week, but maybe not so much in grad school. And I was just there every week, and every week he would welcome me, and we would speak, sometimes for hours. And he was always just wonderfully humble. Recently, we attended the same talk on like decolonial terms and history, and I wrote him this email saying, Charles, I didn't get a lot of this stuff. Did you get it? And he was like, you probably know more about that than I do, so maybe you should explain it to me. And it's just that humility that he had, combined with that brilliance and that warmth and that generosity, that I will always cherish and will always be an example for me. I just wanted to share that in honor of him. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pedro. We appreciate it. And thank you for being here and helping us to bring Charles into our presence and keep his memory alive. So after Pedro, I think we have Brendan Moriarty. That's how, if I'm pronouncing that right. Brendan, are you on the call?
Yeah, I'm on the call.
Cool.
I just wanted to share my handouts that I have from all of his classes. More handouts, more handouts. Just to speak on his handouts, I was a student at the CUNY Graduate Center, and I had, so first I had actually met Charles, a friend of mine, Joshua Kissel, who tried to be on the call, but unfortunately he's grading papers, so he couldn't really do that, and he was really happy when I told him that there would be a recording, so he'll be watching it later. Shout out to Josh. He was at Northwestern, and he had actually invited me while I was applying for graduate schools. I had taken a year off, and he told me, hey, there's this great professor that I've got. You need to come see him. I don't know if you've heard of him, Charles Mills. He's teaching this class on Marx, and it's amazing. And I actually emailed Charles, and I said, I'm applying for graduate school in philosophy. Can I come to your class on Marx? And he's like, of course. And so that's where I have some of the handouts. And he just, he treated me just like any of the other graduate students in the class. And it was so amazing. It really made me who I am intellectually and politically. I remember the last day of class, we watched Trading Places, and he gave us a handout that we were supposed to fill out, and we had read his chapter in a book called Race as and Exchange, Trading Places in the Rise of Neoliberalism, which is an amazing work that I recommend to everyone on this call. And he knew that I drove to Northwestern to go to attend his talk, so he told me, can you go pick up some Indian food for the class? So he bought us all Indian food, and it was always amazing. And I got into the CUNY Graduate Center at the year that he actually moved to the Graduate Center. And I had taken a class with him, obviously, because he was so great. And I can provide those Marx handouts if you could DM me your email. I actually, so I'll say this later. But I saw him in the first class that he taught at the Graduate Center, and he saw me in the room, and he just smiled at me because I think he recognized me, and he didn't know anybody else, and that just made me feel so special. He was teaching a class on social contract theory, and after that class, I had taken other classes, and I said, like, where we talked about Marx, and I was like, oh, I had this great professor who taught Marx. You need to read his handouts. How about this? I'm getting a lot of DMs now asking for the handouts. I'll send them to Lei, and if she could like provide them somewhere, we'll do that. Yeah, so I had actually provided them to other professors to distribute to their classes because they were such great handouts. And Charles was my master's thesis advisor. I didn't end up going for a PhD. It was on the social contract theory in transitional justice. And he hadn't he was never that great at responding to emails. No offense, as many other great philosophers have been or haven't been. And I really needed him to provide some edits on my thesis. So I actually printed it out and I went to one of his classes, and this was in March of last year. So I think it was one of the last classes that he had, and like in-person classes. And I gave it to him, and I remember some of the last words that he said to me. Looked at me, and it was a pretty big thesis, which he very well pared down and made it an appropriate size. And he said to me, he said, "This is a monument to your ambition." And I felt, I don't know, I felt like very validated, that like I really wanted to prove to him, you know, some of my thoughts, and he recognized me, and it was so good recognizing me. And I just want, last thought is, he had such an amazing humor. I've had so many professors, and he was by far the funniest. And it was like effortless too. It wasn't even like he had some bit or anything. You know, he just knew how to tell jokes. And I remember I was sitting in my kitchen just browsing Twitter when I had seen that he had passed, and I was so taken over with grief. And just want to thank everyone for all of their stories that they've shared. Yeah.
Thank you, Brendan, for all of that. Again, just really, I think what we all needed tonight was a way to kind of collectively bring Charles alive and keep him alive. And so we appreciate we appreciate that you took the time to do that with us. So I am going to maybe take a little bit of liberties because I saw that Jane Bunker not just, but a few minutes joined us. And so I was wondering if we could invite Jane to read the just moving tribute that she posted just today that she wrote in memory of Charles, just so we can have it on this recording and archived, because it was just beautiful. Jane, if you're here and you're amenable to that plan, can you unmute yourself? Or you can just tell me, no, I'm not ready to. That's fine.
Hi, Chris and everybody. Yeah, it would be an honor to read this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wrote this yesterday, I guess, or maybe I don't remember. So let me just read it. We lost Charles W. Mills last night. It hurts to write that. There has been too much loss and death these past 18 months. I did not know Charles well, but many people that I published and worked with did. For 13 years, I acquired books in philosophy at SUNY Press. In the early aughts, we began one of the first series on philosophy and race, edited by Robert Bernasconi and T. Deneen Sharpley Whiting. I'll never forget the thrill of hearing that Charles would endorse one of the early books in that series. He was a generous man who did right by younger philosophers. When I took a new job as director at Northwestern University Press, which also had an outstanding list in philosophy, I was starstruck when I learned Charles was serving a term on the faculty editorial board. He was always present for the meetings, courteous, kind, incisive, and he encouraged me to call him Charles and not Professor Mills. He spoke little at those meetings, but when he did, everyone in the room paid attention to his soft, lilting voice. Charles was brilliant and utterly humble. I was always nervous to email him or ask him for anything, knowing that his service to the field and to his university was extensive and demanding, but he was always responsive and unfailingly polite. For a few years, I lived between the L tracks and Northwestern campus and often saw Charles walking back and forth between the train and the university. He had an easily recognizable gait and in almost any weather, it's usually cold in Chicago, sported the same worn black leather jacket. Rather than a briefcase, he always used a backpack. He was tall, but a bit stooped, perhaps owing to the backpack, heavy with books. It always made my day to see him because it was a tacit reminder that there are good and incredibly intelligent people in the world. The book everyone associated with Charles was The Racial Contract, his first book, published with Cornell University Press. I would like to know the story of how that came to be. I've now learned it, by the way. Why Cornell? At that time, Cornell University Press had a tendency to publish more rarefied philosophy, and Charles's work stands out on the list for that reason, for not being so rarefied. Its success brightly highlights the need for more engaged scholarship. When I began as Cornell director last year, one of the many exciting things was to be working at the press that brought out Charles's signature work. At some point along the way, we realized it was coming up on 25 years since its publication, and that an anniversary edition would be a fine way to honor the philosopher whose work was foundational for so many scholars in political philosophy and beyond. Senior editor Emily Andrew approached Charles with the idea, and it was a very happy day when we signed the addendum to the contract for the 25th anniversary edition, which we'll publish in March 2022. Bittersweet now to think that we might have celebrated the book's publication together at some future conference. I hear he was a genius with handouts. I wonder if he made one for the racial contract, a sort of cheat sheet to the major ideas contained therein. The joy of reading an analytic philosopher's work on a topic is in the clarity of thought displayed, and the book is probably quite easily diagrammed. That we will not have this chance at one of the simple joys in publishing, relishing great work well done, is yet another heartbreak. As I read through the many encomiums to the man on social media tonight, what is most striking is how each says the same thing. He was a profound thinker and a generous mentor. He embodied both humor and humility, and above all, his kindness shone through. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, for writing that and for putting it out there, and for showing up to be with us and to share those words, not only with us for the recording. So really appreciate that. It was just beautiful. So thanks, thank you for doing that. All right, so next on our list is Roya Chung.
Hi.
I'm saying that right? Hi.
Hi, I'm Ryoa Chung.
Ryoa Chung.
Yeah, but
Yes, the floor is
perfect.
yours.
Thank you so much for organizing this tribute, this very beautiful and moving tribute to a beautiful and brilliant and bold and brave and profound thinker. First of all, I just want to give all my most sincere condolences to all of you who have had the happiness and the joy to call him a close friend, and to his relatives and to his to our younger colleagues who have been so generously mentored by Charles Mills. All of this, it was not my case, unfortunately. However, I did have the chance to meet him in 2019. I invited Charles Mills in Montreal. So I'm a French-speaking Québécoise from Canada, and I invited him to give a talk in Montreal, and I met him, and it was incredible. I was completely flabbergasted by his kindness, his humility, his humor, his all of what you spoke, and when I read The Racial Contract, but actually the first text of Charles Mills I read was Ideal Theory as Ideology, and it was really an epiphany. And I also took part, the CPA, the Canadian Philosophy Association, organized a roundtable last June 2021 in tribute to Charles Mills. And Charles Mills was there with us through Zoom, and so we were a group of younger colleagues, and I was the most senior of the younger colleagues. So very young scholars, such as Chike. Chike was there. Meena Krishnamurti was there. Audrey Yap was there. Also Yann Tremblay, who is indigenous scholar. Agnès, who is a French woman from the Caribbean, and my friend Naima Hamrouni, who is Tunisian, and myself, I'm Korean. And between 2019 and the last roundtable, I'm not quite sure if this was the last public event of Charles Mills, but in between, we began to be engaged in the French translation of the racial contract, and it's a nice follow-up to Jane Bunker from Cornell University Press. In the following sense is that so the French translation of the racial contract will be done by a brilliant historian, activist, intellectual, and artist whose name is Webster, whose father is from Senegal, and myself and Naima Hampouni, who is also Tunisian, will be assisting Webster in the French translation, and we were corresponding with Cornell University Press 10 days ago. So we were completely shocked by the news of Charles Mills passing away, especially because we were so much looking forward to celebrate the publication of the French translation in 2022, after the celebration of the 25th republication of the racial contract by Cornell University Press. We were already planning a dinner in honor, all kinds of festivities and activities around Charles Mills. And the editor who will be publishing the French translation is from Haiti. He's a writer, Rodney Sedwa, poet from Haiti, assisted by the co-editor Yara, who is a Palestinian writer. So you can imagine, I was deliberately mentioning all these countries of origins because we are so indebted to Charles Mills and to the empowering legacy of his political philosophy, and we are absolutely honored. And Charles gave us his blessing to have the privilege to now share this formidable legacy in French, and hoping that this will empower younger scholars and a whole other generation of racialized political thinkers and activists and artists and so on. So thank you again for letting me share this testimony. And I know that Webster will also say a couple of words somewhere down the line. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that and updating us in the news. It's super excited. And just again, a testimony of how, in all likelihood, Charles Mills's legacy and the gift that he was will just we'll keep on giving and keep on blessing us. So thank you for that.
Can I intervene
Yes.
just for a second?
100%.
There's a couple of people here who have known Charles longer than any of us from Jamaica. One is Peter Sr., and I'm not sure whether he's still here, but the other one is Ward Mills, who is Charles's first cousin and who has been so helpful through the last several months. And I wondered if Ward would like to say something here if he's capable of it. So Ward, I saw him. I know he's here. He's part of Charles's big family.
We'd love to share this space with him if he would like to speak.
Well, yeah, he's not coming forward. What I'll do is I'll text him because we're on WhatsApp together and see if he'd like to, and you can go on. Sorry.
Okay, and then then jump in if you're able to hear from him. Absolutely.
Unmuted.
Oh, he just
Yeah, I just asked him to unmute, and I think Ward is unmuted now.
Oh, good.
Everyone, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Well, you, Linda, you took me by surprise. I have been listening and listening in awe, and but everything that I have heard reflects exactly what I know about Charles as his cousin, his brethren, as we would say in Jamaica, which is saying he's like my special brother, my brethren, and my cousin, and everything. The sadness that I have, honestly, is that I didn't know as much about Charles's work as I have learned in the last couple of days. Because Charles left Jamaica in 1987. And so he was away for a long time. We used to see each other at least once every year and a half or two. He'd come back to Jamaica for a conference or something. And we would meet. We would have to meet to reason, as we put it here in Jamaica, to talk about life, to talk about the world, to talk about issues and so on. And always, if there was any musical event going on, we had to plan for Charles to go, because Charles loved his music. So I was always happy when I heard, okay, Charles is coming at a certain time, and this musical event is going on, live musical event or that, because I know Charles would love that. But when we engaged in discussion and when we did meet, we spoke for hours, whether it's on the phone or when he came. Charles was such a good listener, and I'm hearing this from everybody. And honestly, he made you talk about yourself so much, and not just yourself in a self-centered way, but what's happening in Jamaica, what are the issues, what are the challenges we're having, why are we still having those challenges. And Charles would give you that very intent look. You knew he was absorbing everything that you said, okay? And we would have these long talks, and only peripherally, something about him would come up and what he's doing. You know, and perhaps I blame myself. Perhaps I should have said, Charles, okay, today's about you alone. Let's hear what you are doing. Let's hear about it. You know, maybe I should have done that. But as Linda said, but obviously I've known him for a long time. The first time memory I have of Charles is us being on a ship going to England, from what I can remember. I don't know, he was about 4 and I was about 7 or something like that. And his brother Raymond was there, and the two of them were very active and rambunctious little boys. And I remember being so scared they were going to jump over the railing into the sea because they were so active, you know. But Charles, I've heard a lot said tonight about, I think the term somebody used was, was it a sibling in the struggle? Is that the term that I heard? The note that I got in my copy of the racial contract said, toward a conscious youth from long time. That's Jamaican, a conscious youth from long time. A conscious youth meaning somebody who thinks about the world, understands some of the underpinnings and some of the things that make the world a tricky place. Somebody who's not fooled by the veneer that is out there that makes you feel that everything is okay. And somebody who is willing to explore all of the perhaps darker issues that others haven't. And certainly he gave credit to his brother Raymond for that as well. Because we used to talk a lot about Bob Marley's music, for example, and what Bob Marley was saying about the state of the world and race and Africa and colonialism. So I cherish that little note in the book. I really do. But this is an amazing, I got the link rather late. And so Linda, I only got the very last 2 minutes of what you were saying when the Polish nurse came into the room, right? And I hope I can get to watch the recording to hear everything that happened before I came in. And I must admit that my coming in late had something to do with my technophobia, if you want to call it that. In fact, my wife Janice had to help me to navigate the process with the link and the Zoom and so on for my phone. So all credit to her for allowing me to witness and to hear these wonderful tributes. And thank you so very much for all the love that you have all shown and the respect for my cousin. Thank you.
No, Chris can't.
Thank you so much. We're so glad that you unmuted and you were able to figure out the technologies, because those words, again, it's just so lovely to hear this part of Charles's life. So really, really appreciate that. Thank you. And thanks, Linda, for jumping in. Do that anytime. All right. Actually, okay. So I think Damian Scott recently joined us, and he's been on our list. So Damian, if you're here, you can unmute. The floor is yours.
I am. Thank you, Chris.
Mhm.
And I would like to say good evening and thank all of you for coming together tonight in sadness and remembrance, but also in celebration of Professor Mills's, of Charles's life. I'm sorry that I was a little late. I was team teaching a grad seminar that I was asked to do tonight. I will be brief. I certainly did not know Charles as much as many people here did. I perhaps did not interact with him as much as many people here today did, but what I will say, which I'm assuming will be similar to many of us here gathered, was that Charles's impact on my life was incredibly, incredibly profound. I first met Charles in 1997 as an undergraduate at NYU at the Rutgers Summer Institute of Underrepresented People, Underrepresented Groups in Philosophy. He was incredibly funny, incredibly kind, and incredibly, incredibly brilliant and wise then. And then the other times that I encountered and engaged with him over the course of decades at different conferences, including the Society for Africana Philosophy here in New York, Yale conferences, the Ideology Conference, where I met many of you and many of you were there. And Charles and I had a long, very funny talk over a couple extra glasses of wine at Jason Stanley's house that night. And, a few other times. I will say that Charles's own work has been incredibly motivational in my own work. And I would like to share one quick anecdote story with all of you to kind of give you a sense of Charles's silent brilliance or his tacit or his kindness. We were both scheduled to speak in 2016 or 2017, I believe, at UNC Charlotte for a conference. I, of course, was a headliner, and the great Charles Mills was the keynote speaker. I gave my little thing on semantics and ontology and Afrofuturism, and I discussed the concept of a dark ontology, which I had inadvertently forgotten that I had really gotten from Charles in one of his texts. Blackness Visible. And pretty quickly after giving the talk, and leaving Charlotte, I realized, oh my gosh, I forgot to not only cite it in the paper, but I forgot, in front of Charles and after, over cheese and wine or over dinner to, thank him and acknowledge that. And I stressed about it for a couple of years. I developed that piece over the course of a few years, and that became my first publication. And one of the first things I wanted to do was contact Charles and let him know that I accidentally used one of his constructions without citing it. And I'd forgotten, it was an honest mistake. I stressed for 3 years as this thing went through the editorial process, and I worried that Charles Mills would, not forget that I, took this idea from him. So I emailed him when I got the, final clearance that the thing would go to press. And I said, Professor Mills, how are you doing? This is Damian Scott, sorry about, way back when I mentioned the dark ontology without citation or acknowledging that, that was your original construction. And I think it was about 4 hours later, I received a very short note. Damian, all good, chapter approved. this is Charles's succinct brilliance, you know. So many of us might have interacted with him at different, different degrees and at different times. One thing I never forgot, I will never forget, I should say, is how generous he was with his time and with people who, junior level adjuncts like myself or whichever. He was just so incredibly magnanimous, so incredibly generous, and so incredibly kind. And again, I'll be brief, but I'm sure, like all of you, I'm incredibly touched by his life, and I am, very lucky to have encountered such an amazing, amazing human being. And as Cousin Ward Mills, and as many of the Jamaicans here listening will appreciate, Professor Mills, go on easy, my brethren. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yes. Thank you, Damien. Thank you. I'm glad that you were able to join us, and so we're happy to see you, and we really, really appreciate those stories and those memories. Thanks for sharing them with us. Okay, so I think up next we have, I believe it's Anne and Eden. Is that right, Lee? Anne, are you on the call? You can unmute.
Hi, hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much for organizing this. This is just amazing. Just amazing. And one of the things that I was thinking about is just, how lovely it would have been if Charles could have seen this. But I guess I just wanted to say this, that I was part of the team that Linda mentioned that was, that had the honor of, truly the honor of helping take care of him at the end of his life. And one of the things I wanted to just note is that I did gather some videos from some of you here. I'm sorry I couldn't do it from everyone. As Linda said, he didn't want people to know that he was ill. So I had to kind of do it on the slide, but I gathered some videos from some of you telling him, how much you admired his work. And he watched those videos and he really liked them, and he knew everybody's name, and he laughed and cracked jokes, and you can imagine. And it was one of the things that really stands out for me through the process of the last 5 months when he was ill is that his sense of humor was just it never failed. And so I wanted to tell you a story. I know Linda and Ward have both heard me tell this story, but I thought it was just an example. So I went with him the first time that he saw his oncologist, and the oncologist was describing like the different kinds of treatment and the various like awful side effects that those treatments would bring. And Charles, he's just sitting there listening. And I guess that the oncologist like saved the most minor side effects for last. And so he gives this like list of horrific effects. And then he says, oh, and there's hair loss. And Charles looks down, and then he takes his hands and he puts them on his head and he says, oh God, not my beautiful hair. And I feel like that just really captured something, even in these like really dark moments, Charles's sense of humor was just roaring. So that's it. Thank you all for being here. And I love hearing your stories, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne, for sharing that. That was beautiful. And thanks for being here. We appreciate that. I believe next on our list is Errol Anderson. Lee, if I don't have that right, let me know.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Errol Henderson. Yeah.
Errol Henderson. Yes, I'm sorry. All right, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, sister. I want to send my condolences with the family and the friends of Brother Charles, and thank you all so much for organizing this. And wow, yeah, I didn't see this one coming. This was something. I didn't know Charles Mills well. I call him Brother Charles, But I come across him at a APSA conference, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago or so, and just struck up a conversation with him. You know, I do international relations, and I thought that his piece on the racial contract had huge implications for international relations theory. I'm not a philosopher, so I was talking to him about. He was just so generous with his time, and it just struck me. And the brother was just so cool. He was just so cool walking to the conference. And then we had a chance. We were on a panel together, I know, in London, and he was just so, like the other folks have said, just giving up his time and so incisive and supportive, and it was just a privilege to work and integrate what he did in the racial contract into international relations theory, and I shared that with them in a piece I wrote called "Hidden in Plain Sight" about racism and world politics. But I told brother that I was already using his text in my courses in international relations. So I put together one on racism and world politics here at Penn State, and it was just something, just how profound he was. But he was just so cool, and it just struck me. Now, I told Brother Charles, I'm from Detroit, but my mother's from Alabama, but my father's from St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica. So I told him, I said, Brother Charles, it's hard to argue with you because you sound just like my father. And then I said, but Brother Charles, it's easy to argue with you because you sound just like my father. And he got it immediately. So I just wanted to share that, but enough respect, and we're gonna miss brother. And wow, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Errol. Yeah, we're all gonna miss him over and over again. So we appreciate you being here and sharing that story, and for taking the time to share to make this space with us. So next, I believe it's Jan Boxall.
Let's see if I can unmute. I think I unmuted.
You are unmuted. We can hear you.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to talk for both Bernie and me. We've been longtime friends with Charles, probably some of our oldest and best friend. But I want to thanks first for everybody being here. Your comments are amazing. But he was for many of us in the old guard, one of our best friends and fellow Caribbean like Bernie. But it's heartening for us to listen to all the stories and to hear just how much he meant to all of you, the younger people. But what is most heartening about it is that his life and legacy and philosophy will carry on with the young folks now that the older folks are getting even older. So, but I want to thank all of you, and it was good seeing everybody on this, and I'm talking both for Bernie. And when I talk about the younger folks, like you, many of you, one of my former students who was an undergraduate here at University of North Carolina just received her PhD in August with Charles, was on her committee, and we've been corresponding. And it's devastating when we heard of his passing. So thank you all, and good to hear everybody's comments, and also that his life and legacy lives on with so many of all of you younger groups. So thank you.
Absolutely, his legacy will live on. Thank you so much, Bernie and Jan. We appreciate you being here, just seeing you on the screen and having you make this space with us. So thank you for that. So next, actually, if she is amenable, I would like to invite my co-host Lee to unmute and perhaps share her video and have the floor. Hi, Lee.
Hey, everyone. I just want to say I cannot possibly. So Chris and I put this together at the last minute, as all of you know. We were literally overwhelmed by the response, and I cannot possibly express my gratitude to everyone for being here. I've been, as you know, on the back end of this Zoom session and a little bit in the weeds. So I'm sorry if I've missed some of you or delayed getting some of you on the list. I hope everyone gets a chance to speak. And obviously, please do continue to message me if you want to have a moment to speak. Thank you, Chris, for giving me a moment to speak. It's hard for me to speak extemporaneously, so I'm just going to read what I posted the morning that I learned that Charles was gone. So this is it. I knew this sad day was coming soon when we would lose the inimitable Charles Mills. And in fact, for the last couple of weeks, I had dreaded opening up my social media every morning. And today, so this was the day after Charles died, I learned that he was gone. It's impossible to overestimate the impact that Charles had on not only the discipline of philosophy, but so many individual philosophers, myself included. And I am absolutely heartbroken and may have more composed thoughts to share at a later date, but here are some of my immediate thoughts in remembrance of Charles. I met Charles for the first time almost 20 years ago when I was a grad student at Penn State, and I was hosting a conference after party at my extremely tiny apartment. And very late that evening, Charles and Linda, I know you remember this, showed up. And Charles immediately sauntered over, put his arm around my shoulder, leaned in, and shouted over the noise in his sing-song dialect, "All of this furniture must move. We need a dance floor." And I just kind of stood there stunned while he directed everyone present to push all of my furniture. You know, I was a grad student, it wasn't a lot of furniture, but all of my furniture up against the walls and create the dance floor that Charles and Linda required. In other words, we hit it off from the start. In my experience, being friends with Charles wasn't the kind of thing that slowly developed over time. Like, we met, we were friends, and it was as simple as that. And it's really been so ever since. Over the last 2 decades, we shared many quick conversations in the hallway of some conference or another, many more long conversations over dinner and many, many drinks, too many emails and phone calls to count. And since COVID, a few Zoom chats during which I constantly made fun of him for his always weird placement of himself in relation to his camera. And that's not even to mention the hundreds of hours that I spent with him, reading his books and his articles, all of which were written in exactly the kind of voice as his IRL voice. Reading Charles was always uncannily like being with him. Everything about our friendship was easy, not because we didn't disagree or criticize each other, but because I think we shared a lot of, not strictly speaking, philosophical commitments in common. A commitment to what he would sometimes call straight talk, although he would always hilariously stipulate that he didn't mean straight in the sexual sense, because I know you like the women. That's what he would say to me. To public-facing scholarship, to sympathetic readings of texts, but more importantly, of people, to calling bullshit on bullshit, to resisting the siren call of academia's prestige economy, or in some, to seeing the first job of a philosopher as staying as far away as possible from the fucking armchair. In 2013, when I found out that I was denied tenure at my first job, Charles was one of the first people I called. He told me that he would take a long, hard look at my tenure file and he would tell it to me straight. And after he took that long, hard look, he was the first person to say to me in no uncertain terms that I had been screwed and that he was the person who was, and that he was the person who convinced me to appeal my tenure decision. He also told me that there was a 99% chance that I would lose the appeal, not because you're wrong, he said, but because the academy is built to protect and defend its decisions. And I couldn't see any point at the time in appealing the decision, but Charles gave me some of the best, kindest, and most compassionate, brutally realist advice. And here's an actual quote from his email. "Fingers crossed that a miracle occurs. But there's really no win here. If you get your tenure denial reversed, you'll be in a place you don't want to be and where people don't want you. If you don't, then you're back on the job market, and it's a very bad job market. But I know you, and I know you will forever regret not calling out an injustice as an injustice. This is an injustice. So let's give it an audience. That was a quote from his email. He said, let's give it an audience. That's what he said. And I felt like that was his way of saying, I've got your back. Of course, I appealed the decision. Of course, I lost. Charles, as always, didn't just offer armchair advice. He wrote letters in support of me to the appeals committee and to the president. And when I was on the market looking for a second job, he was right there with me every step of the way. I can count on less than one hand how many 100% solid human beings I've known in my life, and Charles Mills is chief among them. I was reemployed, and 3 years later, I was tenured. And on the day I was awarded tenure, the first 3 people I notified were in this order: my partner, Cassandra Line, Charles Mills, and my dissertation director, Jack Caputo. Charles sent me a quick message back that said, "Congratulations, I knew it would happen. You should gloat obnoxiously." The last extended conversation I had with Charles was the week after the January 6th insurrection, when Charles was a guest on my Black Mirror Reflections podcast. And I know this is going to sound like a plug for my podcast. It's 100% is not, but I'm going to put a link to this episode in the chat because you really should listen to it. It was almost a year into COVID, and Charles and I had been corresponding about other things, but I had mentioned to him that I was doing this podcast about Black Mirror, and Charles was so excited because I did not know this at the time. He was a huge sci-fi fan. So I asked him if he wanted to be a guest on the podcast to talk about White Bear, and he enthusiastically agreed. And because I was still new to podcasting at the time, I was recording each podcast episode using Zoom. But now, in retrospect, I am so fortunate to have had that opportunity to chat with my very dear friend, face to Zoom face one last time. And I'm so happy that I have a recording of it, of our last extended conversation for posterity. The episode that Charles was a guest on that day was only slightly more than an hour long, but we actually talked for hours and hours and hours, and I actually had to edit it down afterwards. Everything about that conversation captures Charles's spirit so perfectly. His quick-witted and infectious sense of humor, his sincere inquisitiveness, his genuine excitement about new ideas, his ability to effortlessly navigate the space between high theory and realpolitik, his timeliness, his innate friendliness, his drive to seek out nuances rather than flatten or avoid them, and perhaps most importantly, his intentional and unwavering commitment to always situating himself in the present socio-political moment. At the end of that episode, I actually told Charles, and this is on the recording, that I wanted him to bottle up whatever it was that he had that made him so interesting and sell me a bottle. To which he replied in classic Charles Mills fashion, "I'm saving it up for my retirement, Lee, and hoping to get a steady income from it." I already miss him so much. I know that somewhere buried in my files, I have at least 24 of Charles's infamous handouts from past conferences, and I will definitely be digging them out soon. And as I suspect many of us who love Charles will be doing, I'll be finding a way to pay it forward. His friendship, his kindness, his criticism of and commitment to the discipline of philosophy, his impassioned advocacy of the marginalized and the underrepresented, and his insight into what is required to create a more fair, more responsible, more compassionate, more self-reflective, and more just world. I miss you, Charles.
Thank you, Lee, for sharing that. Just so much there. So we appreciate it, every last word of it. So thank you. So we have, as of now, we have 2 folks remaining on our list. So I have Webster LS. At least that's how the name was given to me. And I believe Namita Goswami, I think I see your Zoom hand, right? I'm assuming that's because you would like to be put on the list. So that's the order I have for right now. So Webster, I believe.
Yes.
Are you? Yes. Okay.
Yes,
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I wasn't planning on taking the floor, but I wanted to. I feel a bit intimidated by those beautiful minds of yours. I'm not in philosophy. I'm not a scholar. I'm a hip hop artist as well as a historian from Montreal. And I read The Racial Contract 2 years ago. I know it's a bit late, but I read it and I felt it was so strong. I was wondering how it read in French. So I started to dig to find a French version to see how it was translated, but it wasn't translated. I was wondering, like, 25 years later, how this so important book hasn't been translated. So I decided to translate it. And I'm not a translator. As I said, I'm not in philosophy, but to me, I felt this kind of urgency that his writing, his thoughts had to go beyond the English-speaking word. I felt that the Francophone word needed to hear and read what it was talking about. So for the last year, I spent every day translating that magnificent book. Something I find is the most important books in the last decades, where it breaks down so many things that we felt but didn't know about. So we know about history, some bit of philosophy, whatever, but as I wrote to him, it's like he found a theory of everything, you know, like in physics, like they're looking for the theory of everything. Well, I felt that that's what he did. So that's why I decided to translate it, even though it's not my field. So I just wanted to share to you this testimony of the strength and the power of his mind and his writings that stopped me in my track and decided to to just translate this book, even though that's not what I was doing at the time, with the help of Yowa Chong and Neema Hamruni, who are teaching philosophy. They're helping me to navigate this word. So I just wanted to tell you that his word might be able to live in the Francophone world and let his writings still guide us through the next stages of history. So thank you very much, and rest in power, Charles Mills.
Thank you, Webster. So there's folks in the chat that are thanking you for your labor. So I just wanted to make sure and say that out loud. Thank you so much for your labor. This is really, really invaluable and crucial work. So we as a community don't take it lightly at all. So thank you for doing that. And you're right, The Racial Contract is a tiny little book that stops you in your track. I have 5 people in my family and we have 5 copies. Everybody gets one at some point. I kid you not. So, so thank you for sharing this space with us. Going back to my list, let's bring in Namita. You can unmute, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you.
I actually wasn't going to speak, but Lee's bravery gave me some strength to share my story as well with Charles, and my story in the academy as a woman of color and the role that Charles played for me. And Lee, I do remember dancing in your house way back in the day in our ill-begotten youth, when we all first started out in the academy in our first jobs. But like Lee, I was denied tenure, and what I wanted to really emphasize was the absolute moral courage and clarity with which Charles was willing to not only stand by my side, but to call his alleged colleagues racist. And we have academic battles that are waged in the classroom. We have academic battles that are waged at conferences, but we also have academic battles that are waged in a court of law. And that is a cynical and nihilistic space that if and when you get to that point, the academy has a way of making you feel like it's all your fault, that there must have been something wrong with you for things to have gotten to that point, or it's a department business. It's not, it's private, it's departmental, it's personal business. I'm just concerned with this scholar because this scholar works on X. And so I'm going to invite them to work to contribute to my anthology or to participate in my conference. And whatever racism or retaliation they are perpetrating, that's completely separate. And that's white privilege. That's the benefit of white supremacy, that their racism becomes something else. But it wasn't just his willingness to go to a court of law and to take a stand against what had happened to me, but it was with the absolute grace with which he encountered the experience, confronted the experience, and processed the experience, and tried to help me figure out how to move forward. And one of the shocks that I was experiencing at the time was that he was chosen by my department to be my external reviewer. And he was the only person of color who was chosen to be an external reviewer. And I was the only person of color coming up for tenure, and a white male was coming up for tenure at the same time. And his two reviewers were white men. And even though it was miraculous and amazing and just incredible to have Charles Mills be the one to review your work. And you don't find out who the reviewer is until later anyway. What happened was that even being Charles Mills did not protect him. And so you had people like Peg Birmingham, Elizabeth Rottenberg, Michael Noss, Rick Lee, challenging Charles's integrity, saying that he was not qualified, distorting his words, saying that years ago they saw me have coffee with him at some conference. So clearly he is incapable of being biased. Even as we know, even as Rick Lee himself admitted that his external reviewer was somebody that he had stayed with. And I just remember, I was horrified, because it's one thing for me to experience racism, but this was Charles Mills. This was Charles Mills who had contributed more to the academy and to the production of knowledge than, at least in my view, all of these people combined, because two of them are simply commentators on a French philosopher. And even Charles Mills did not protect him, and he had to confront in depositions, in meetings, what was being said about him and how his integrity was being challenged and how he was being called a liar. And in watching his reaction, I just learned so much. And for me, I realized that when I grow up, I want to be Charles Mills. I want to be able to move in the world in the midst of this hatred and nihilism and cynicism and brutality that women of color experience, which Hortense Spillers says can only be called racism on a lazy day because they treat you as if we have eaten their firstborn. But when I grow up, I want to be like Charles Mills and have that grace and have that moral courage and have that clarity and that perfect sort of centered demeanor. I know who I am, but better yet, I see you and I know who you are. And the only other person I've, sort of seen this with is Nelson Mandela. He reminds me of Nelson Mandela in that respect. And he did right by me as a junior faculty member. There were other philosophers who were ostensibly philosophers of race, who were white women, who, when it came time to actually stand up for a woman of color like Shannon Sullivan, they hemmed and hawed, and their prestige was more important to them than actually putting their money where their mouth is. But he was willing to do so. And it's very tough to be in a situation where you have an academic department, an educational institution, an insurance company, and a law building in downtown Chicago merge into actually one same thing. There's no distinction between them. And when you, as a younger faculty member, are fighting for your life, it's in those moments where most people are too worried about the next goodie that they need, or there's always some other goodie to get, or are not willing to take a risk, even if their positions are secure. It was in that moment where Charles Mills stood up and said, "I am here." And does anyone remember his office in Northwestern and how 10 years ago and how hard it was to even get through the door because of all of his books and everything? And I would tease him that he's a hoarder. I don't know if you all remember, but it was like you had to push open the door and there were books and papers everywhere, but he met with me wherever I needed to meet him, wherever we decided we were going to hold a meeting. He strategized with me. He helped me find jobs. And the best news is that I won. I won in federal court. Not that it makes a difference in the comfortable social world that is the academy, but I won in federal court in no small part because Charles was willing to stand up for me and to stand by my scholarship and stand by what it is that he himself fights for. So Lee, I wasn't going to share this, so it's all your fault, but thank you.
Thank you, Namita. I don't know if we should blame Lee because that was a really powerful testimony, and I know it required strength, but we really appreciate it because again, it's like it's kind of what we all need, I think, right now, to sort of build a memory and make Charles' presence. And he was just so much larger than life and so much larger than the space that we can make for him. And that what you have to share, Namita, really speaks to that. So if Lee's to blame, we thank Lee, but thanks to you as well for sharing that story.
Lee is not to blame. It's Charles Mills who's the man to blame for these stories, right? Like, no, it's just that he inspired all of us to not take this shit.
We continue to be inspired. So I do have to say, because it'd be unfortunate if I don't. So we have this space on Zoom until 10 p.m. Eastern. And I believe that at 10 p.m. we're all gonna poof like Cinderella and turn into pumpkins. So having said that, we probably have time for one more speaker and a closing of sorts. And again, so Lee and I, we tried our best to put everyone on the list to give everyone a chance to speak and share and contribute to building and keeping Charles in our memory. So we do apologize if we were not able to get you. But at this point, I want to call Kristen Waters. And so Kristen will be our last speaker, and then we'll bring things to a close before Zoom shuts us down.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So moving. I just want to say hello to all my friends and thank Linda and Lee and Chris and Ann and everybody. Catherine, I remember when you started the Collegium, you told me that it was your version of reparations. Anyway, I'm going to read something that I wrote. I can't quite comprehend a world without Charles Mills, a man who, along with a handful of others, wrought out of whole cloth a contemporary philosophical tradition that turned mainstream philosophy on its head and made it respectable for so many others to continue that work. I feel in my core that his passing has instilled in us collectively, suddenly, in this very moment, a determination not just to continue the work, but to swell the ranks of the discipline and to refuse, that is, to just say no to that significant portion of the field that continues to recycle the topics, the arguments, the racist misogyny that still dominate the field. Charles carefully, stitch by stitch, argument by argument, demonstrated that race, gender, and class had everything to do with the core of philosophy, metaphysics, epistemology, political theory, ethics, and that no branch of philosophy could any longer pretend to be exempt from considerations of race. I first met Charles at a Philosophy Born of Struggle conference in the 1990s, and in this magical way, we became friends from that point on. I say that we were friends because Charles had the gift of befriending people, making you feel that you and your work were important, regardless of your standing in the field. Perhaps this was enhanced by the mischievous glint in his eye and by the fact that his rapid fire conversational delivery required that you lean in close and listen carefully, your mind racing to keep up with him, saying, for example, that European humanism usually meant that only Europeans were human. We met again at the inaugural meeting of the Caribbean Philosophical Association in Barbados in 2000, a small but powerful seismic explosion that announced to the world that philosophers of the African diaspora would now be setting the agenda. We talked and met and exchanged work for more than 20 years. After that, including in Jamaica, he read and commented on the whole of a recent book manuscript, why I was so shocked to learn of his passing. I could go on, but I won't, only to say that Charles, for all his generosity, was not immune to certain vanities. So one of my regrets today is that Charles is not here in person to listen to our accolades and to take in our expressions of admiration. I think he would have loved it.
And would have managed to turn everything into some sort of hilarious joke. So absolutely. Lee, let me bring you in to officially close us out, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could not officially close this out without encouraging all of us to give a round of applause, like, virtually, to Chris, who has really negotiated this space, which is so difficult emotionally and psychologically, and she's done it so gracefully. I've just been on the back end, dealing with chats. So thank you so much, Chris, for doing this. I really appreciate, I could not have asked for a better person to organize this with. I do want to express our apologies for anyone who asked to be put on the speakers list and we were not able to get to you. We really tried to get to everyone. We had no idea that we were going to be dealing with this number of people. So please, we still have less than 10 minutes left, that anything that you want to put in the chat for this Zoom recording will be saved. We will be sharing the Zoom recording widely. We will first share it with SPEP, who we hope SPEP will put it on their webpage, and later on YouTube and Vimeo, so everyone will have access to this Zoom recording. And we also know that there are going to be future memorial services in Europe, in the Caribbean, I'm sure all over the world, for this literal giant of a human being that we are all grieving the loss of tonight.
Absolutely. And thanks to you, Lee, for being the technical brain behind it all. We appreciate it. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming and sharing the time and the space and the energy, because it does require, right, this affective energy. We're all here because we love Charles in all our various ways, and it's just going to be tough figuring out how to do not just philosophy, but just to do us with a world without Charles. It's going to be tough. So let's keep in touch with each other. Let's keep spaces with each other and among each other. And again, we do believe there are going to be future memorial opportunities to do this. So do be on the lookout for that. So
yeah, and if I could just echo what Chris just said, let's keep in touch with each other. I mean, I think that there's no greater testimony to Charles's impact than the community of people that he impacted, understanding that they are a community of people. So look, like, quickly scroll across, see all these names, and reach out to them. They are your people.
Absolutely.
We are our people.
Absolutely.
So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to, I'm about to just put up a kind of shared screen. I'm going to leave this open for 9 more minutes until 10 o'clock. And anything anybody wants to put in the chat that you haven't said already, we'll leave it there. But we thank you so much for coming.